Carson, thank you for sitting down with us ahead of the primary here in just a few weeks. Let me ask you, you've represented this district for nearly 20 years, 18 years, in a race where some voters are talking about new leadership. Why should they stick with you?
Well, for me, I'm someone who has brought back over $1 billion to Indianapolis for projects like Indigo, uh, the Cultural Trail, investing in organizations like the Boys and Girls Club, Fathers and Family, Overdose Lifeline. I helped to pass the largest investment in infrastructure in nearly a century, which helped with our rail, sidewalks, water, broadband access, and even roads. I'm currently in a leadership position on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. I'm the ranking member, God willing, soon to be chair of the Aviation Subcommittee. I haven't been afraid to take on Donald Trump. And, I was critically responsible for helping to cap insulin at $35 a month, even when pharmaceutical executives across the country were very upset with me. And so I'm always involved in community events. I host events specifically for the community, our Youth Opportunities Fair, the Job Fair. We just had a utilities assistance fair, an immigrants workshop. And, my opponents, my constituents have seen me. My opponents haven't seen me because they've been in consultant circles hanging out with politicos. That's not being in the community. Campaigning is not the same as governing. And you could have a new face with old ideas. And we represent the new movement of consistency, of bringing back results to the district in the form of $1 billion and 22 pieces of legislation signed into law. There are colleagues of mine who have been in longer than I have who haven't even had one bill signed into law. So we have a great team, and I'm honored to serve. Thank God.
You have three primary challengers this time. You typically win by comfortable margins. What do you think is driving that you have three challengers this time around?
Well, we always have two or three challengers. I mean, this is a democracy, and uh, there are different motivations for it. Some want to get their name ID up to run for something else. Others see it as a means of enriching themselves and bolstering their consultant firms. But, for me, it's about serving the people. And I want to be clear, Indianapolis has, you know, Democrats in every countywide office. We've gained seats in the state house for Marion County. We have a Democratic supermajority on the city council, and that's based on what we're seeing with organization within the Democratic Party. Indiana has some of the worst voter access laws in the country. The entire state has struggled with turnout. That's not just one case. So turnout is deeply tied to the national conversation. And we're seeing huge turnout numbers this year because people are responding to Donald Trump.
Let me ask you a legacy question. You initially came into Congress after your grandmother, Julia Carson, Congresswoman Julia Carson. She was deeply respected here.
Mhm.
Do you think that legacy has helped define your career, or has it been something that at this point you've had to step out of and establish on your own, be in your own lane?
Oh, certainly. I was raised by my grandmother. I lived with her longer than anybody who ever lived. And I'm fortunate that she chose to raise me. My mom and I lived in a shelter. I love my mom. She was my best friend. I was in a guardian home. My grandmother stepped in and decided to raise me in one of the toughest neighborhoods in the state at the time. And I'm very proud of her. I'm proud of what she's accomplished. I'm proud of what she taught me. I'm proud of what I learned from her. She was very tough on me. She gave me old school tough love. She often told me I reminded her of herself, and she was tougher on me than other people. But she always reminded me that she was raising me to have my own mind. We would often have, political debates about some of our philosophical differences. And I'm proud of her legacy. And, I have my own legacy, but I'm not ashamed of that. I see where so many people, even my opponents, they come from legacies. They come from parents who've accomplished things, and they could be proud of those things, and that's okay. Well, I'm proud of my grandmother, and I'm not ashamed of my grandmother, and no one can make me feel ashamed of my grandmother. She raised me, she taught me. I'll forever thank God and be grateful for having been raised by her in a very tough village that also helped raise me. And so no one can make me feel ashamed about my grandmother. Others are allowed to talk about their parents and their grandparents. Well, damn it, I'm proud of Julia Carson. I'll never be ashamed of her.
Let me move into some of the issues shaping this race right now. Because beyond your record and longevity, voters are dealing with a set of very real pressures that keep coming up on the campaign trail that we keep hearing about. One of the biggest themes right now that we hear a lot about is affordability, from housing to utility bills. In terms of housing, I know that Congress doesn't control local zoning or housing supply directly, but it does shape financing and incentives. What do you think is the most effective lever at the federal level to actually improve housing affordability for people?
Well, one, we have to get private equity firms out of the housing business. I think that this has to stop. President Trump has expressed an interest in it, but it hasn't been sustainable. We have to absolutely have a moratorium on private equity firms investing in housing. They're freezing out buyers in the market. And listen, we have to uh, raise the minimum wage. We have to make sure that all Americans have a dignified wage. We have to make sure that people know that there's dignity in work, no matter what it is. And so I think when we get back to the basics of focusing on raising the minimum wage, placing a moratorium on private equity firms, get them out of the housing market, and we could make sure that we're tightening up on many of these people who want to flip homes but don't live in the communities in which they want to flip homes. And so once we start there, but it's going to take cooperation at the local level first, the state level, and the federal level to get things done. It's a working democracy where all of us have a role to play, from the citizen to the elected official to the media and the fourth estate. We have to hold these entities accountable and collectively work together to make sure that anyone, if they choose to do so, can reach the American dream.
Another big cost for families, big reoccurring cost, utilities. Across
Mhm.
Indiana, families are seeing higher electricity and utility bills. What do you see as the main factor behind that?
Well, I just had a discrepancy with some of my utility bills as well. So I can, and I'm in DC, most of the time. And so I think that we have to make sure that utility companies aren't prioritizing the bottom line over community interest. That's why I think that uh, many of our utility companies should be kind of in a public trust, like we've seen with citizens, where taxpayers and citizens have a stake in these entities, and the bottom line is de-emphasized, and citizens' pockets are emphasized.
Part of what people I think are trying to understand, or what we've seen, is what's actually driving the utility costs behind the scenes and who ultimately controls these decisions that go into setting the bills. And so recently, there's been announced an acquisition of AES by a BlackRock-led consortium. What's your view of that deal and what it could mean for Indiana ratepayers?
Well, I've spoken out strongly against this deal. We're exploring federal options. Congress can hold oversight hearings on private equity ownership of certain monopolies, utility monopolies for sure. And we can push for stronger consumer protection standards for utility acquisitions nationally. And my bottom line, as I just said, is really accountability. AES is effectively a monopoly. Hoosiers can't choose another electricity provider. That's why competition in this space is critically important. And when you have a private equity consortium with, a 15 to 20% return target, it takes over a monopoly utility. And the people who pay the price are working Hoosier families who just want to go home and turn their lights on. And, I want to make sure folks know that I'm very committed to making sure federal oversight is robust. Consumers are protected, and this deal does not become a vehicle for basically extracting wealth from indie neighborhoods.
So some of your challengers have raised concerns about the timing of your public comments about this acquisition. They felt that you could have spoken out sooner, and the fact that you've accepted corporate PAC contributions from both companies involved. How do you respond to those criticisms?
Well, simply untrue. I've consistently voted for lowering utility costs. Utility costs aren't high because of Democrats. They're high because of Republicans. Hoosier saw cost increase when Trump got into office. That's primarily because of Trump's tariffs on steel, aluminum, and electrical equipment. And Republican lawmakers in the state house have given passes to utility companies at the expense of customers. I passed measures that lowered utility costs, that had tax credits for energy efficiency upgrades and solar panel incentives and direct utility assistance through the LIHEAP program and grid modernization. And, there's no amount of money that could make me turn my back on my constituents. Donald Trump has undone or is in the process of undoing the progress that has been made by Democrats. And I voted again and again to lower utility costs. And to tackle this issue, it's important that we understand the issue. It's Trump's policies that have caused this crisis.
Your challengers have said if they were elected, they would not accept corporate PAC money ever. Where do you stand with that?
I'm consistent. There's no amount of money from an individual or a PAC that would make me turn my back on my constituents.
I've heard you refer to it as being Robin Hood. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, I think in a very real sense, we listen to many of these entities who are community stakeholders. A lot of the PAC money comes from employees who give $10, $20, $30 from their checks, every paycheck, to these PACs so their voices can be heard. And, oftentimes the critics may not take a PAC check, but they do get checks from wealthy donors who have an ownership stake or who are connected to these very entities who have PACs. And so they get around it that way. But oftentimes these donors have greater demands than a PAC would. But at the same time, I don't care if it's a wealthy donor. I don't care if it's a PAC. No amount of money will make me turn my back on my constituents.
Let's shift to data centers. Part of what's driving the utility cost debate is the growing demand on the electric grid. And one of the biggest new drivers of that is data center development. Your challengers are calling for a moratorium on new data centers in Indiana, all three of them. Do you support that as well?
Well, I've said over and over. In fact, not only have I called for it, if these entities cannot make the case, but I've introduced a bill. I'm introducing a bill that deals specifically with data centers. It's called the AI Data Center Site Selection and Transparency Act. And it requires early disclosures to the public on all new data centers. And, it addresses those key impacts that we talk about: water consumption, cooling demands, environmental impacts. All violations of these things would be deemed illegal. So I support a moratorium on all construction in our district. These data centers have not made the case. I think they have a responsibility to make the case to the public, to Hoosiers, that they will not cause an undue burden on rate users. They will not cause environmental disruptions, and they will produce jobs. And they failed to do so. And so my bill, which is called the AI Data Center Site Selection Transparency Act, will get introduced. And again, it requires early disclosures to the public. And we're going to deal with things like electricity use, water consumption, cooling demands, and environmental impacts. And violations of those things would be deemed illegal.
Another issue that's been very present in Indiana right now is immigration enforcement and the presence of ICE activity in the state. State lawmakers passed legislation this past session that allows for greater cooperation between local and state governments and ICE. Your opponents, all of them are calling for ICE to be abolished. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I think if reformations can't take place, then ICE would have to get eliminated and placed under an existing agency or start a totally new agency. I visited Miami Correctional. You were there. We've had 2 deaths in 2 months. I called for the end of ICE detention at Miami Correctional. So we need more details, but I've already been raising the alarm on ICE's very callous disregard for human life. That's why I will continue to vote against ICE funding. It's why I'm hosting webinars for immigrants to know their rights. We cannot allow this to continue. 32 people died in ICE custody in 2025 alone. Uh, when we see ICE shoot and kill 2 people in Minneapolis or Minnesota, we saw it on video. And DHS needs to provide answers on how 2 people have died in 2 months at the correctional facility alone. They seem to want us to forget that 70,000 people detained by ICE, including children and babies, are human beings. And so I'm leading a congressional inquiry to demand answers on ICE and Indy right now as we speak.
Another issue that's come up a lot when talking about trust in government is public safety and how safe people feel in their own communities. IMPD data right now shows that violent crime is down in Indianapolis. Some residents we're hearing from still say they don't feel any safer, despite what the numbers say. And public safety is largely handled locally, but people, like it or not, still look to elected officials at every level when they don't feel safe. So in your view, what can a member of Congress realistically do to impact crime, if anything?
No, that's an important question. We've seen too many tragedies in our own backyard. Guns simply should not be this readily available. And I say that as, law enforcement officer. That's why I introduced my gun safety incentive act with some colleagues to incentivize people to safely store their guns. That would prevent suicides, unintentional shootings, and even stolen guns. But I think we have to invest in jobs, education, career training, and housing to give people alternatives to violence. It's about to be summer, and we know that violence always increases in the summer months. And it's on all of us to address this violence. It's about our communities really coming together. But it's also about having positive role models. And I've introduced bills with Senator Booker to increase mentoring programs for that very reason. And I'm very encouraged that we have seen decreases in violence overall in Indy. But any life lost is a tragedy, obviously.
I want to shift to foreign policy for a moment because international tensions, particularly involving Iran, are ongoing. They're part of the broader national conversation. 2 British ships were fired on in the Strait overnight. Where do you see the current situation in Iran heading, and what do you think the U.S. posture should be right now to avoid escalation?
Well, President Trump has yet to come before Congress to make the case that it is our constitutional duty and obligation to enact wars, with the exception of very exigent circumstances. And President Trump has failed to do so. I think that this war has been disastrous. It has caused economic instability, not just here, but in the region. Gas prices have skyrocketed. We're still dealing with rising food costs. And Trump's leadership has effectively been disastrous. The American people want answers. Our allies want answers. And so Pakistan has been very critical in trying to, negotiate this matter. But I voted in favor of a war powers resolution to really limit Donald Trump's drag on our nation deeper into another foreign war. I'm demanding accountability and I'm demanding transparency. And I questioned Trump administration officials at a recent House Intelligence hearing. And so I'm going to keep pushing, holding this administration accountable, and keep calling out the hypocrisy. He promised lower costs. He promised America first. He's done the opposite.
Let's talk about, now that we've done some of the issues that are top of mind for voters, you've reintroduced a financial literacy bill. What would that actually do for people in your district?
Well, I've met with educators. I've met with superintendents. I just met with superintendents and educators about having financial literacy taught in our schools and making it mandatory. Everyone likes the idea, but the fact is that our educators in our schools are stretched very thinly because of testing requirements. We want to create a space where we can partner up with the Financial Services Committee and credit unions in particular, who have made a commitment to help out and teach basic financial concepts. The objective isn't to make, our children hedge fund managers. That would be great. Solvent wealth fund managers. That would be phenomenal. It's to give them basic working tools to be able to make sound financial decisions once they leave school.
Let me ask you about something you've been able to move forward, because I know the financial literacy bill, it's been introduced a few times and it's taken some time to get across the finish line, or it hasn't gotten across the finish line yet. So why do you think that is? Let me ask you that first.
Well, I think because, for some people, it's not a priority. It depends on the time. When there have been bills that have been stalled and it becomes the talk of the day or something popular and, it gets fast tracked because people are interested and want to be a part of it. I think now more than ever, there's certain bills that you keep pushing. It's a personal passion of mine, and I've met with Republicans who concur, who agree with us, who agree with me. But I think in this age of great confusion and division, it's often difficult to have voices heard unless there is an emergency. We are in a financial crisis right now. And now more than ever, a financial literacy bill for all Americans is ever important.
You've also worked on secondary cockpit barriers on aircraft.
Yes.
How much of the fleet is actually covered today? That's just new aircrafts, or is that also older aircrafts?
It's newer aircrafts for sure. Older aircrafts would obviously have to do a retrofit to make it happen, but new aircrafts without question.
That was a recommendation, I think, coming out of 9/11 before you were even in Congress.
Mhm.
Why did it take more than 2 decades to get there, do you think?
Again, priorities. I mean, a lot of the airlines were reluctant because it was an additional cost, and you'd have to push those costs on to travelers. And, it was that kind of reluctance. But unfortunately, sometimes it takes a tragedy, God forbid, in order to wake people up. But in this case, we were able to get it done without an additional tragedy because we kept pushing. We reached across the aisle. We kept pushing. We kept pushing. We built relationships with other Democrats. We built relationships with Republicans. And, we have the number one airport in the country, 14 years in a row, right here. So what better person or representative to introduce it than the current ranking member over the aviation subcommittee, who has the best airport in his district. We do it on behalf of Hoosiers, and hopefully other folks will get inspired to make the necessary retrofits in a reasonable amount of time.
Final question. As of April this month, the public approval rating for Congress remains at a near record low of 16%, with approximately 80% of Americans expressing disapproval. This follows a year of significant volatility for the 119th Congress, which included the longest government shutdown in U.S. history, the ongoing partial shutdown of DHS. Given that, incumbents like yourselves find themselves at a unique time and in a unique position facing this historic low approval rating for Congress. Right or wrong, you are part of that Congress. So how do you differentiate yourself, and what's your message to voters about why they should choose to keep you in this role another term?
Well, it's something I never take for granted. Congress, I don't think Congress has ever had a very high approval rating. It's like the old adage, people hate Congress, but they love their congressman or congresswoman. And so people can make the distinction. I think with our great team, I've been very effective. And we have to remember, Republicans control the Congress right now. Republicans control the House and the Senate. Democrats made historic growth in the job market. We strengthened the economy. We lowered healthcare costs. We handed Trump a very strong economy, record-breaking growth after the pandemic. And before Trump took office, more people than ever had healthcare. Donald Trump effectively ruined it. This is our city, but unfortunately, it's Trump's America. And our number one focus, and my number one focus, has been to defeat Donald Trump. I'm working to pass bills and make progress through this administration. I just recently, a few weeks ago, secured $13 million under this administration for our district. And I've introduced measures to protect health care, to fight ICE. I'm not afraid to stand up to Donald Trump. I brought back over $1 billion, 22 bills passed into law, helping organizations like Fathers and Family, Boys and Girls Club, Voices, Overdose Lifeline, helping with the Cultural Trail, Indigo, roads, sidewalks, bridges, rail. The best is yet to come if the people choose to put me back in office.
Congressman Carson, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
What an honor. Thank you.